The world opens its wallet to Afghanistan at an international donors conference in Paris. But is there $50 billion in there like Hamid Karzai wants? Or will the corruption that plagues Afghanistan affect the generosity of the international community? Rebuilding Afghanistan on the world's money. This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. $50 billion to rescue a country in ever-increasing turmoil. That is what the Afghan government is asking from the international community. More than 60 countries are meeting in Paris to discuss a 5-year development plan, but given they've already thrown some $25 billion at the country since the fall of the Taliban 7 years ago, they're also demanding the current government tackle Afghanistan's rampant corruption in return for the cash. But with a burgeoning drugs trade under the watchful eye of the Taliban, that will be no easy task. From Paris, Tim Friend has more.
The plush meeting halls of the Paris Conference Centre are a far cry from the poverty and desperation of the Afghan people. But this could be a crucial turning point in their history. As the donor countries assembled, there's a sense of a new determination to overcome the barriers that have prevented help reaching those who need it most. Well, amid tight security, the donor nations are now locked in meetings here behind me. There'll be some tough questions for Hamid Karzai, namely, can he clamp down on corruption and make the aid work more effectively? President Karzai has told Al Jazeera that he wants to wipe out the poppy crops that are fueling the Taliban resurgence. But he will have a hard job convincing skeptical delegates here.
Our vision for Afghanistan is achievable. However, we should be aware of the obstacles in our path. Security continues to be our biggest challenge, without which progress on every other objective that we have will be either difficult or sometimes impossible.
In Afghanistan, aid work is battling against a lack of coordination and a lack of trust in the Afghan leadership to carry out its role effectively. Publicly, the French president acknowledged the difficulties.
We need to mobilize our efforts to pursue the pledges made in London in January 2006. In this conference, I hope that we can renew our strategy for success. In March, in Bucharest, at the NATO conference, we decided a global response was needed.
Afghanistan wants $50 billion for a 5-year development plan. It won't all be forthcoming immediately. The figure is likely to be closer to $15 billion. Afghan members of parliament are frustrated with the lack of progress. Speed is now essential. 33% of Afghans do not have enough to eat. Tim Friend for Inside Story, Paris.
Well, joining us today in our discussion are our guests in Paris, Daoud Sultanzoy. He is a member of the Afghan parliament and the chairman of the Economic Committee. Also in Paris, Yama Torabi, a researcher and founder of Integrity Watch Afghanistan. And in London, Paul Burton, the Director of Policy Analysis at the Zenless Council. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on Inside Story. I think the issue of corruption is going to come up a lot in this program, and I will deal with that more in the second half. For now, I want to look at the actual conference. Daoud Sultanzoy in Paris, it seems about $20 billion has come through. Do you think the Afghan government will be happy with that, given Hamid Karzai was so publicly aiming for $50 billion?
Actually, this has several sides to the story. While the commitments and the pledges are not where the government was expecting to be, but at the same time, this shows that the people of Afghanistan and their voices have been heard, because people were unhappy about the government's performance, the leadership's performance, and the governments of the donor countries have put conditions on this money, and they did not give as much as the government wanted. Even $50 billion wouldn't have been enough had we had a transparent government, a government with good leadership. This was a very, very important message to the government and leadership of Afghanistan, that the people of Afghanistan's voices are echoed in this pledge and commitment, that every penny that is given to the government and people of Afghanistan through the government or through the donors will be committed based on certain conditions, and certain benchmarks and deadlines and timelines and commitments. And this is a vote of no confidence basically on Mr. Karzai, because he did not perform to the expectation of the world and to the expectation of the Afghan people. And we've been echoing this for many, many months and a long time, that people are dissatisfied the way the aid is administered, the way the governance and corruption and lack of rule of law and all these things have created a problem that is beyond repair and in some cases. And I think the world community and the taxpayers of the world are interested in some performance, and I hope that the Parliament of Afghanistan will also be able to play its oversight role, and the world community will be able to see that transparency and proper administration of these funds will take hold.
Okay, let's go to Paul Burton in London. I mentioned that number already, 20 billion. Is that in line with what you expected, given that around half of that has come from one country, the United States?
Sure. I mean, I think one could have expected the international community to dig deeper in its pockets. And let's just put the American figure into some sort of context. When we consider that America spends around $35 billion per year on military activities in Afghanistan, and then one can contextualize that with how much money it spends in Iraq on military, we can see that the actual amounts that have been pledged to Afghanistan and to the future of that state aren't really sufficient. Another key benchmark really is the per head disbursement figure, and we can see in Afghanistan it's around $60 per head, and in other key post-conflict societies such as East Timor and Kosovo it hits $300–400 per head. So I think there's still a very long way to go here before the amount actually sent to Afghanistan can have a demonstrable impact on the ground there.
What makes the donor countries, however, those who do come and do give some sort of money, this might sound a little silly, but what is it that makes them keep coming back? I sort of look back over the last 7 years and you could say that the progress in Afghanistan has not been that great, really, 7 years after the fall of the Taliban, yet they come back and keep pledging their support.
It's absolutely imperative that Western states continue to demonstrate their intent to remain in Afghanistan for the long haul. Let's not forget that it was the West, under the US-sponsored coalition of the willing, that entered Afghanistan to remove the Taliban from power. So that country, with that action, demonstrated its commitment to the country, and it needs to prove that it's there for the long haul. Similarly, from a NATO perspective, that alliance needs to demonstrate similarly that it's not going to withdraw anytime soon until the country can stand on its own 2 feet. And from both the military and economic perspectives, we know that Afghanistan is some way away from there. So what makes countries go back? Well, it's the knowledge that if they don't go back, we could descend once again into the situation we saw in the late 1990s with ethnic disputes spilling over into actual conflict and the Taliban starting to impose its radical writ upon the country.
Let's go to Yamatarabi in Paris. Technically speaking, the Afghans have now got, at least on paper, $20 billion to use, and there is so much talk about how it should be properly used. Our other guests have pointed out that the amount per head is really not enough compared to other countries. How would you feel that money could be best used properly on the ground to help people in everyday life?
Well, the amount per capita is one issue. Of course, Afghanistan has been underfunded over the last 6 years. But then there are many other issues which are still there. And Paris conference has been the first milestone to push really on this issue. One of the biggest problem is that the aid in Afghanistan, for instance, is not distributed equally in every province. So when you look at the distribution per province, you will find per capita in some provinces $30 per head, and then you will find in other provinces, such as in Kabul, where $600 has been spent per capita. So this makes huge disparities among regions, and of course a lot of tensions. Now, many opposition leaders and figures now have raised the issue, and this is something that is quite important. And another important issue is the amount of aid that reaches the Afghan economy or the Afghans. This is a big problem because most often the pledges don't tell you what, how, and it will be spent in Afghanistan. They will be spent in imported human resources, on imported products, and on imported services. So at the end, you will get something like 20% of the aid that's going to be spent, reach the Afghan economy. You know that the reaches of this money is quite limited in terms of job creation, the impact on the economy, and so on.
Let's get a quick thought from Daoud Sultanzoy in Paris before we do take a break here. I just want to look back in time a little bit before this conference, because previously, since 2001, there's been about $25 billion pledged to Afghanistan by the donor countries. Do you believe those donor countries have come through properly as far as that money goes?
Actually, in order to put this whole thing into perspective, the amount of aid that was pledged or committed or brought into Afghanistan and whatever happened to it is another question, but the amount itself was a fraction of what, relatively speaking, what was committed for East Timor or Bosnia, and Afghanistan is many times larger and many times more problematic than those countries. So the amount was never enough. Not only that was not enough, but the way it was delivered and the way it was administered was also very, very questionable. In many ways, the money was filtered through so many filters, and the end recipient was, who were the people of Afghanistan, did not receive what they should have received. In many cases, they did not receive anything. In some cases, they received just a token of what was distant to the people of Afghanistan. Basically, what we are talking about is mismanagement, abuse, waste, and improper channeling of the money, because there were no strategies, there was no leadership, there was no direction. We didn't even know where we wanted to take Afghanistan. For example, we were thinking of Afghanistan as a transit state between many other countries, but traditionally Afghanistan is an agricultural state, and 80% of the people used to be farmers. And why shouldn't we spend money on the agriculture where we can take care of the poppy problem and also create employment? This was lost in the past 6-7 years, and the government of Afghanistan did not have the leadership and did not step up to the plate to change this, and this was an imposed doctrine and an imposed path that in Tokyo the government of Afghanistan did not defend the case of the people of Afghanistan, and then we are where we were. But on the other hand, to see the glass half full, we see the world's commitment to Afghanistan, which is still there, and this is very important. Governments come and go, people will vote other governments, but the commitment of the world to Afghanistan is very important, and where we should at this point start learning from our mistakes and make sure that we don't repeat them, and we don't waste the money of the taxpayers.
Indeed, and that's what we're going to look at after the break. When we come back, a closer look at this issue of corruption. Can this government be trusted with yet more donations, and does all the money pledged by international donors really reach Afghanistan? More on that in a moment.